Let's drift back, not just a few centuries, but all the way to the beginning. Imagine a time before houses, before cities, before even villages, a time when the world was wild, and nights were long, dark, and cold. When the first people looked into the blackness of night, they felt not just the chill in their bones, but also the weight of uncertainty. What waited beyond the shadows? Predators? Storms? Or simply the endless silence? And then, one day, there was fire. A spark, a flicker, a miracle that changed everything. Before we step deeper into this story, let me pause for just a moment to welcome you here. If this is your first time joining us, I'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss the journeys we share through the quiet corners of history. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me, where are you listening from? Is it late at night, perhaps as you drift into sleep? Or is it early morning, when the world is still calm? I always enjoy seeing the different times and places where these words find you. Now, back to the fire. The first hearths weren't tidy stone circles like you might see at a campsite today. They were little more than patches of glowing embers, sheltered from the wind, coaxed into life by hands that had only just learned the secret of keeping flame alive. Yet in those fragile fires lay the foundation of home itself. Picture the glow on cave walls, shadows moving slowly, the crackle of burning wood. Around it, people gathered close. For warmth, yes, but also for something deeper, something that made them feel safe enough to close their eyes and drift into rest. And they weren't alone. Archaeologists tell us that even in those early days, fire didn't just draw people. It drew animals too. Wolves, once prowling in the dark, came nearer, curious. They found scraps of meat thrown into the flames, bones left by the hunters. And, more than anything, they found warmth. Imagine a wild creature edging closer, eyes shining in the firelight, not as predator, but as fellow traveler through the cold night. Over countless nights, those creatures and humans learned to share that warmth. It's no wonder that wolves slowly became dogs, guardians and companions of the hearth. But the fire itself was the true center. It was more than heat, it was continuity. Embers kept alive through the night meant survival. One person might stir in the darkness, reaching for a branch to lay across the coals. Another would shift the ashes, protecting the faint glow until dawn. And so the hearth became more than an invention, it became a ritual, a rhythm. Think of the comfort it must have given. To hear the steady pop of wood, to smell the smoke curling upward, to feel the heat brush against your skin. Outside, the wind howled, but inside that circle of light, the night felt less threatening. Families huddled together, bodies close, with children in the center where warmth was strongest. Even the simplest fire became a fortress against the cold. Over time, hearths grew into more than survival tools. They became gathering places. Stories were told there. Songs were sung. Tools repaired, food shared, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The hearth wasn't just flame, it was memory and continuity and belonging. And if you close your eyes, you can almost imagine it. A cave dim with smoke, faces faintly lit in orange. A wolf curled at the entrance, ears twitching at the night beyond. The fire burns low, and one figure reaches forward, gently feeding the embers. The group breathes together, slow and steady, sinking into the oldest kind of peace humanity has ever known, the peace of firelight. Even today, though our hearths may be stoves, or fireplaces, or glowing lamps, the instinct remains. That little pool of light in the dark still calms us, still tells our minds, here you are safe, here you can rest. So when you next watch the flicker of a candle, or sit by a fire, remember you are connected to an unbroken chain stretching back tens of thousands of years. The hearth is not just a place in the home, it is the home, the first home humanity ever had. And if you linger with that thought for a moment, you might realize that the hearth was never just a pile of burning sticks. It was, in many ways, the very heart of human life. Imagine the circle it drew in the darkness. Outside the ring of firelight, the night was vast, endless, and unknown. Inside it, there was warmth. There were voices. There was a sense of belonging. That simple circle became the first boundary of home. Think of the small, ordinary moments around those fires. A child poking at the coals with a stick, watching sparks fly upward like tiny stars. An elder leaning closer, telling a story of the hunt, or perhaps a story meant not to explain the world, but simply to pass the time. Someone chewing on roasted roots, someone else sharpening a stone blade by the glow. These quiet routines, repeated night after night, gave shape to human existence. And the animals, too, slowly learned to share that circle. We often picture wolves as fierce predators, but in the firelight, their shape softened. Perhaps at first they lingered on the edges, waiting for scraps. Then, as seasons passed, they inched closer, until one evening a hunter noticed that a wolf had not come to fight, but to sit, to breathe the same smoky air, to rest beside the same flames. In that moment, something remarkable began, the first steps toward companionship. The hearth was wide enough to welcome more than people. But there's another layer. Fire was not just about heat or safety. It was rhythm. The fire had to be fed, tended, guarded. It required patience, and in that patience, it gave structure to the night. Picture someone stirring awake, not from fear, but from duty. They reach for a branch, place it gently across the embers, watch the flames stir and flare. Then, reassured, they lie back down, listening to the crackle as they drift once more into sleep. This cycle of waking and tending, of watching and resting, became almost like breathing for the community. Inhale, gather fuel. Exhale, feed the flame. Over and over, for thousands of years. And it is easy to imagine how the fire shaped the mind as well as the body. To stare into flames is to slip into thought. Even today, people sit by campfires and feel their minds wander, lulled by the shifting glow. Our ancestors must have felt the same. The fire became a companion of thought, a partner in dreaming. Perhaps it was by the hearth that the first myths were born, flickering in the same rhythm as the flames. The hearth, in this sense, was a teacher. It taught patience, because a neglected fire meant cold and hunger. It taught cooperation, because no single person could watch it through the long hours alone. It taught care, because the lives of children and elders depended on its steady glow. And, perhaps without anyone realizing it, it also taught love, the simple act of keeping another warm through the night, of making sure the fire did not die, of offering peace in the place of fear. And still, if we lean in closer, we can imagine the textures of those nights. The rough feel of hides spread on the ground, layered to keep away the damp, the weight of a fur draped over weary shoulders, the mingled smell of smoke, of cooked meat, of the earth itself warmed by flame. Outside, the winds whistled, trees creaked, snow crunched under distant paws. But inside that circle, sounds softened. The fire hushed the night. The heart slowed, breathing steadied. Even the stars above must have seemed to join the circle. Step outside the cave for a moment, and the sky would blaze with constellations, with the Milky Way stretched bright from edge to edge. For people who had no roof but the heavens, the stars were not decoration. They were part of the rhythm of life. Perhaps someone gazed upward from beside the fire, seeing in the sparks of the sky the same glow that danced in the flames. Fire below, fire above, the hearth and the heavens mirroring each other. And in that gentle comparison, the human mind must have found comfort. The fire wasn't just survival, it was connection to the earth, to the sky, to the animals that drew near, and to the family that sat close. It was a bond that held them together night after night across endless winters. So when we speak of the hearth, we're not simply speaking of firewood and ash. We're speaking of the first home, the first comfort, the first light in the darkness. And though the world has changed, though we now live in houses of brick and steel, with electric lamps and quiet radiators, the memory of that circle is still with us. In every candle, in every fireplace, in every glowing light that tells us, here you are safe. Here you may rest. As centuries rolled by, the simple circle of fire began to change. People no longer wandered endlessly, chasing herds and seasons. Some began to linger, to stay in one place a little longer. And with that change, the hearth itself changed too. At first, it was still just a fire on the ground, perhaps protected by a few stones. But over time, people realized that fire could be shaped, stones could be stacked, forming walls to cradle the flames. Clay could be hardened to hold embers more safely. And slowly, what had been a patch of glowing coals in a cave became something more permanent, a hearth, a fixed place where the fire always lived. And this changed everything. Because once the fire had a place, the people had a place. Villages, you could say, were born not from walls or roofs, but from hearths. Where the fire stayed, the family stayed. A home was no longer just shelter from the rain. It was the place where the hearth glowed. Picture one of those early homes, a simple hut, perhaps made of branches, mud, and reeds. In the center, a shallow pit lined with stones, smoke drifting upward through a hole in the roof, the fire crackling, glowing, always alive. Around it, people sitting not just to eat, but to talk, to repair tools, to simply exist together. The hearth was not only warmth, it was community itself. And the animals were still there too. By now, the wolves that once lingered cautiously at the edges had become something else: dogs, companions, guardians. They curled by the hearth just as people did, ears flicking, noses twitching, but their bodies relaxed in the comfort of the flames. Goats and sheep too, drawn close to the settlement, sometimes warmed themselves near the outer glow. Slowly, the circle of fire became the center not just of human life, but of a shared life between people and animals. As societies grew, the hearth grew with them. In many cultures, it became sacred. In Greece, the goddess Hestia was the hearth itself, honored above all others. In Rome, the eternal fire of Vesta was kept burning by priestesses, never allowed to go out, for it symbolized the life of the city. Even in small cottages, far from temples and cities, families treated the fire as something holy. To let the hearth die was not just inconvenient, it was a kind of loss, a wound in the heart of the home. And think of how that feeling echoes still. Even today, in places where wood smoke drifts from chimneys, neighbors notice if a hearth goes cold. A house without warmth, without fire, feels empty, abandoned. But the hearth was more than symbol, it was invention. It allowed people to cook not just meat, but grains and bread. It allowed pottery to be hardened, tools to be forged. Around the hearth, technology was born. The soft glow of embers held more than comfort. It held progress. And still at night, when all work was done, it returned to its gentlest role, a place of rest. Families lay down near it, soothed by its glow. Children fell asleep to the murmur of stories, to the gentle pop of wood, to the rhythm of flames breathing in the dark. Adults, weary from labor, let their thoughts slow in the same glow, their bodies sinking into the peace of firelight. Imagine one of those nights. Outside, winter presses hard against the walls of a thatched hut. The wind groans, snow piles high, but inside, the fire burns steady. Shadows move gently across the roof beams. A pot simmers faintly, sending up a scent of stew. A dog sighs, curling tighter near the embers. A child stirs, pulling a blanket closer. The world outside may be harsh, but inside, there is peace. And that peace comes from the hearth. Over the centuries, the hearth became a fireplace, then a stove, then a symbol carved into stories and songs. Yet even as technology changed, the feeling remained the same. Fire is safety. Fire is rest. Fire is home. As time moved on, homes grew larger, stronger, no longer just huts of branches and clay, but wooden houses, stone cottages, even castles, and in each of them, at the center, still burned the hearth. In the Middle Ages, the fireplace became the heart of the household. In a great hall, where lords and servants alike gathered, a wide stone hearth sent its smoke up through an open roof. Meals were cooked there, of course, but it was more than a kitchen. It was a meeting place, a stage where life unfolded. Imagine the hall by firelight, shadows stretching along high beams, tapestries shifting gently in the smoky air. The fire glowed not only on faces but on the very walls, as though the house itself lived and breathed with the flames. And in simpler cottages, the hearth was even more intimate. A small fire, carefully fed with whatever wood could be gathered, warmed the single room where an entire family slept. On the mantel above, perhaps a clay pot, a few herbs hanging to dry, or a candle stub. Every household chore, every quiet evening, revolved around that glow. Mothers told stories by it, fathers mended tools, children dozed on the floor, lulled by the crackling sound. The hearth became not only practical but symbolic. It was the marker of belonging. To have a hearth was to have a home, a place where one belonged in the world. Travelers, welcomed in from the road, were invited to sit by the fire. Strangers, once they had warmed their hands, became guests. The hearth was hospitality itself, a silent language older than words. Come closer, sit, be safe, here. And so it wove itself into culture. Poets and storytellers used the word hearth to mean not just fire, but family, roots, the very idea of home. Kings might rule from thrones, but ordinary people ruled from hearths, keeping their families alive with every spark. By the Renaissance, chimneys appeared, guiding smoke neatly upward, and the hearth became even more comfortable. In cities, rows of houses glowed with little fires, each one a reminder of life within. The flicker of light in a window told neighbors, a family rests here, a story unfolds here, love is present here. Even as centuries passed and technology changed, the hearth held its place. In Victorian times, a fireplace was no longer only for survival. It became decoration, framed in carved wood or polished stone, surrounded by chairs where people sat to read or talk. It became a symbol of refinement, but still carried the same warmth, the same sense of gathering. Children still stretched out on rugs before it, pets still curled up at its side, and weary souls still found rest in its glow. And think of today, even now, when electricity lights our rooms and radiators warm our walls, we still keep fireplaces. We light candles. We build campfires. We gather around the glow of screens too, as though seeking a new kind of firelight. Something in us remembers. Something in us longs for the circle of warmth that told our ancestors, here is safety, here is comfort, here is home. Close your eyes for a moment and picture your own memories of fire. Perhaps a campfire under stars, with sparks rising like fireflies. Perhaps a winter evening, with logs crackling in a stove while snow fell outside. Perhaps just a single candle, flickering in the dark. All of these are echoes of the same ancient hearth, the same flame that once kept wild animals and humans together in the safety of night. The hearth is more than an invention. It is a memory, shared across generations. It is the first light we ever trusted, the first warmth we ever shared, the first home we ever built. So when you see a flame, whether it is great or small, you are seeing the same story told again, the story of humanity's oldest companion, the story of how we learned not only to survive, but to rest, to gather, to dream. The story of the hearth. Let's go back, far back, to the very beginning, to a time when there were no villages, no houses, not even a word for home, only darkness, cold, and endless night. Imagine the first people sitting in that darkness, the air sharp with frost, the ground hard beneath them, their bodies shivering, their minds restless, for in the dark every sound was a threat. The snap of a branch, the low growl of something unseen, the rustle of movement just beyond sight. And then something changed. A spark. Perhaps lightning struck a tree, and flames leapt upward into the sky. Perhaps embers glowed after a storm, waiting for curious hands. However it came, it was a miracle, sudden and alive. For the first time, humans looked not only at shadow, but at light. They reached toward it. They fed it. And in feeding it, they created the first hearth. It was small at first, just a cluster of sticks burning low, fragile and uncertain. But to those who huddled near, it was more precious than anything else in the world. The fire gave warmth, yes, but also courage. Around it, they could see each other's faces. Around it, the darkness seemed less endless. Around it, they could finally close their eyes and rest. Picture them, gathered in a cave. Smoke curling upward, staining the rock ceiling black. Flames dancing on the walls, turning stone into a living canvas. Children pressing close to parents. Elders watching the embers carefully, knowing that to lose the fire was to lose safety itself. And always, the crackle and pop, steady as a heartbeat. The fire had to be guarded. One person would stir, half awake, to place another branch upon it. Another would shift embers beneath ash, keeping them alive until morning. It became a rhythm, a pattern of life. Night after night, season after season, the fire was tended like a living being. It was not only a tool, it was a companion. And in that companionship, humanity changed. For the first time, nights were not endless fear. They were softened. They became time to gather, to speak, to simply be together. The hearth gave not only warmth, it gave shape to community itself. Imagine the silence of a cold night outside, broken only by the distant cry of wolves. And then imagine the cave, alive with glow, the smell of smoke, the sound of soft breathing. It was a different world, carved out of the same darkness. The fire was the boundary. Outside, the unknown. Inside, peace. Now, let us imagine something even more surprising. The fire, glowing in the night, did not only call to humans, it called to others too. Out in the darkness, eyes gleamed. Shapes moved. Wolves, cautious and lean, lingered at the edge of the light. At first, they circled with suspicion, ears back, teeth flashing white in the dark. But the fire was warmth, and warmth in the long cold was irresistible. Picture it, the hunters, sitting close to the flames, watching as shadows of wolves flickered on the cave walls. A log pops, sparks drift upward. The animals do not attack, do not vanish. Instead, they wait. They are patient. They are curious. And slowly, over nights and seasons, something new begins. Perhaps it started with scraps tossed aside, bones cracked open for marrow, meat charred too long to eat. Wolves crept closer, snatched them, and darted back. The fire did not frighten them away completely. It drew them near, and in that nearness, an understanding grew. One night, a wolf curls down just beyond the circle of flame. It does not sleep deeply. Ears twitch. Nose lifts to scent the air, but it stays. Another night, another wolf follows, and soon there are several, lying like silent watchers, their bodies outlined faintly by firelight. The humans, at first wary, begin to feel something unexpected. They feel safer. For the wolves, with their keen ears, hear dangers long before human senses can. And so the fire, once only for warmth, becomes a bond between species. Imagine a child stirring in the night, opening sleepy eyes to see the shape of a wolf at the entrance of the cave. Its eyes glow amber in the firelight, but they do not gleam with hunger. They gleam with watchfulness. The child feels no fear. Instead, the child drifts back into slumber, knowing that the night is guarded not only by parents, not only by fire, but by these wild companions who have chosen the same circle of warmth. Over time, the distance shrinks. Wolves do not only linger at the edges, they come nearer, share heat, share breath. And what began as caution grows into trust. From trust comes companionship. And from companionship, the first steps toward what we would one day call friendship. But it was not only wolves. Other animals, too, found comfort at the hearth. Imagine goats or sheep pressed close to walls, sheltering near the glow, their bodies warmed just enough to survive the long cold. Birds roosting in rafters of huts, their small sounds joining the crackle of logs. Even creatures of the wild, drawn to the safety of flame, discovered a kind of quiet truce in the firelight. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. The hearth was not only for people, it became a shared space, where fear gave way to closeness, and survival became something done together. The crackle of the fire, the breathing of humans, the steady guard of wolves, all blending into a rhythm of night. A rhythm so ancient that even now, when a dog curls at our feet by the fire, some part of us remembers. Some part of us knows that we have always shared the warmth. As the years rolled on, the fire no longer wandered with the people. At first, it was carried embers tucked into bundles of bark, sparks shielded in stone bowls so that it would not be lost when families moved. But eventually, something shifted. People stayed longer in one place. They built shelters not just for a night, but for a season. And in the center of those shelters, the fire found its home. No longer just a fire on bare earth. Stones were placed around it, at first loosely, then carefully, creating a cradle for the flames. Clay was packed against the ground, hardened by heat, until it became a surface where embers glowed more steadily. What had once been only a blaze of chance became the hearth, a deliberate, crafted place for fire to live. And once the hearth was fixed, something remarkable followed. The home itself became fixed. For where the fire stayed, the family stayed. A circle of warmth gave birth to the idea of belonging. The hearth was not only heat, it was anchor. The glowing heart that told people, this is where we return. Picture one of those early huts, branches woven into walls, sealed with mud, a roof of reeds, sloping against the rain. And in the center, a shallow pit lined with stones, glowing red in the darkness, smoke drifting upward through a hole in the roof, or curling lazily into cracks between beams. Around that hearth, every part of life unfolded. Here, food was roasted, roots pulled from the earth, meat from the hunt, herbs gathered from the forest. Here, water was boiled, slowly bubbling in clay pots hardened by the same fire that now licked their sides. Here, tools were mended in flickering light, skins scraped and softened, baskets woven. The fire was not just warmth, it was craft, it was food, it was work and rest, woven together. And yet, when the day's tasks were done, it returned to its oldest gift, peace. Families leaned close, not for survival alone, but for comfort. Children dozed with their heads in laps. Dogs lay curled, paws twitching in dreams. Adults told stories, not just of danger, but of wonder, tales of ancestors, of spirits in the flames, of the great animals beyond the forests. In the glow of the hearth, the mind softened, the body eased, the world became gentler. The hearth was the first clock, marking the rhythm of life. In the morning, embers coaxed back into flame signaled the start of the day. At night, fire burning low meant it was time to rest. The rise and fall of flame was the rise and fall of time itself. And so, slowly, the hearth was not only part of the home, it became the home. To speak of someone's hearth was to speak of their family. To sit by the hearth was to be safe, to be among one's own. The walls, the roof, the floor, all these mattered less. It was the fire, steady and glowing, that truly made a place into home. As the centuries deepened, the hearth began to mean more than warmth, more than food, more than light. It became a symbol, a quiet, living spirit in the center of every dwelling. People no longer thought of fire only as something to feed with wood. They thought of it as something to honor, to protect, to treat with respect. In many ancient cultures, the hearth was sacred. In Greece, there was Hestia, the goddess of the hearth itself. Every meal, every gathering, began with a small offering to her flame. To let the fire die was not simply careless. It was a break in the sacred rhythm of life. In Rome, the goddess Vesta was honored with an eternal fire that burned in the heart of the city, tended by priestesses who never allowed it to go out. That flame represented the life of the people. As long as it burned, the city endured. But even in humble cottages, far from temples and cities, the hearth carried the same weight. Families whispered quiet thanks to the flame, dropped in herbs to bless the household, kept embers alive through the night as though they were guarding not just warmth, but the soul of the home. To carry fire from one house to another was to carry a blessing. To give someone a coal, still glowing, was to share life itself. Imagine a family gathered at dusk, a pot simmering above the coals, its steam rising into the smoky air. A parent adding a handful of dried herbs not only for flavor, but as an offering. A small ritual repeated without fail. The fire pops, crackles, accepts the gift. The children watch quietly, learning without words that this glow in the center of their home is something more than fuel. It is continuity. It is tradition. The hearth was also a witness. Births were celebrated by it, new couples blessed beside it, farewells whispered into its smoke. In some places, ashes from the family hearth were mixed into the foundations of a new home, so that no matter where people went, the old fire lived on in the new one. The hearth was not just a tool of survival, it was memory itself, passed forward. And think of how universal this is. From northern forests to desert camps, from huts to palaces, fire was always at the center, always honored, always kept alive. Even when people could have walked away, even when the world outside pressed hard, the fire gave them a reason to gather, to stay, to believe in something constant. Even today, echoes remain. The phrase, keeping the home fires burning, still means more than tending flames. It means holding on to love, to family, to belonging. A fireplace in a house is not only decoration, it is a symbol, an unbroken thread reaching back to the first sparks on the floor of a cave. So when you sit by a flame, when you watch its glow and feel its warmth, you are not just watching wood burn. You are looking into something ancient, something sacred, something that has bound humanity together for longer than memory itself. The hearth is not only stone and ash, it is spirit. As time moved forward, the hearth began to take on new forms. It was no longer just a pit of glowing stones, nor only the clay-lined hollows of early huts. In the Middle Ages, it became the great open fireplace, built into the very heart of castles and cottages alike. Picture the great hall of a medieval manor, high beams, stone walls, banners swaying in the draught, and at the very center a vast fire. Its smoke rose slowly into the rafters, curling upward through an opening in the roof. Lords and ladies sat on benches near the blaze, their faces golden in the light, while servants carried platters of food that had been cooked in the same flames. Dogs stretched at the edges of the fire's warmth, just as they had since the earliest caves. The hall was immense, echoing with footsteps and voices, but it was the fire that gathered it all into one circle, one community. And in humbler cottages, the hearth was smaller, but no less central. Imagine a single-room dwelling, its floor earthen, its walls of timber and wattle, smoke drifting through a thatch roof. In one corner, a stone-lined hearth glowed softly. A pot hung above it, bubbling with stew of beans or barley. Children pressed close, their cheeks flushed from heat, while outside frost crusted the fields. The fire was everything, The kitchen, the furnace, the light, the comfort. Without it, the room would be only darkness and chill. With it, it was a home. As centuries passed, the hearth grew more refined. Chimneys rose, guiding smoke upward, making air inside cleaner, making warmth easier to hold. In towns and cities, rows of houses glowed with fireplaces, each one its own quiet universe. A lamp in the window showed the world outside. Here, life continues. Here, the fire burns still. By the time of the Renaissance, fireplaces were no longer only practical. They became places of gathering, framed with carved stone, adorned with mantels where families set treasured objects. Fire became part of the rhythm of daily life, and the hearth became a stage for memory. Birthdays were marked before it, winter nights softened by its glow, quiet evenings shared with stories and song. And then came the Victorian era, where the fireplace grew smaller, neater, more ornamental, polished tiles, iron grates, decorative mantels. Families sat in upholstered chairs, reading by firelight, sipping tea as logs burned slowly. Children played on rugs before the flames. Cats curled in the glow. The fire was no longer survival, but it was still comfort. A heartbeat in the house, a rhythm of light and shadow, sound and warmth. Even as technology advanced, as gas lamps lit streets and radiators hummed in walls, people still clung to the hearth. For though it was no longer necessary, it remained beloved. It was not only heat, it was presence. The gentle flicker of flame gave something machines could not. A sense of life in the room, a reminder that even as the world rushed forward, something ancient still glowed at the center of home. And even now, in our modern houses, with electric bulbs and glowing screens, the pull of the hearth has not faded. We light candles in dark rooms. We gather around fire pits in backyards. We build campfires under starlit skies. Some even keep virtual fires on their televisions, just to see the steady flicker, to hear the crackle. It is not about warmth anymore. It is about memory, deep memory, carried in us from the first people who ever watched a flame dance on stone walls. The hearth is eternal. It has shifted shape, pit, fireplace, stove, candle, screen, but its meaning remains unchanged. It is still the center, still the gathering, still the comfort in the night. If we linger a little longer by the hearth, we cannot ignore one of its greatest gifts: food. The fire that warmed bodies also warmed meals, and in that act it changed human life forever. At first, it was simple: meat charred on sticks, roots softened in embers, nuts roasted until their shells cracked. But even those first experiments brought something new: the taste of smoke, the sweetness released when raw things met flame. Food was no longer just fuel, it became comfort. It became ritual. Picture the earliest stews, bubbling slowly in clay pots balanced above the embers. Into the pot went whatever could be found: meat, herbs, wild grains, sometimes even berries. The scent rose up, filling the hut with warmth, not only of heat but of flavor. Outside, the wind cut across fields and forests. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of supper. Children leaned closer, their mouths watering, their eyes sleepy, their ears listening to the gentle murmur of voices. Bread, too, was born of the hearth. Imagine dough pressed flat, laid against hot stones, slowly puffing, browning, filling the air with that unmistakable fragrance. The breaking of bread became the breaking of silence, the act that turned strangers into companions, families into communities. To eat together by the fire was to share not only food, but trust, belonging, and peace. And in every age that followed, the hearth remained the kitchen of life. In medieval halls, spits turned slowly, roasting venison or boar, the juices dripping into pans beneath. In cottages, humble stews simmered, peas and onions hissing in iron pots, while loaves browned beside coals. The meals were different, but the rhythm was the same. The family gathered, hands warmed not only by fire, but by bowls passed from one to another. Think of how deep this memory goes. Even today, We find peace in the smell of something cooking slowly, in the quiet bubbling of a pot, in the golden crust of bread breaking open. These sensations soothe us because they are old, older than history itself, older than writing, older than walls of stone. They are the memories of the hearth, carried forward in every recipe, every shared meal. And perhaps this is why food by fire has never lost its place. Even in the modern world, where ovens hum and stoves gleam with steel, people still gather around grills, still roast marshmallows over campfires, still simmer stews on wood stoves in mountain cabins. The flavor is different, richer. When smoke lingers in the air, the heart remembers, even if the mind does not. Close your eyes and picture it. A winter night, snow falling against the roof, fire glowing softly in the hearth. A pot hangs above the flames, steam drifting upward. The scent of broth fills the air, mingling with wood smoke. Someone stirs the pot, slowly, gently, while others sit nearby, talking in hushed voices, their faces touched with warmth. A dog shifts, sighs, settles again at the fire's edge. And for a moment, the whole world is gathered in that small circle of light, where flame and food and family are one. The hearth was never only stone and ash. It was never only fire. It was also the taste of warmth, the smell of home, the comfort of knowing that hunger could be met with more than survival, with satisfaction, with contentment, with joy. If we stay a little longer beside the hearth, we begin to notice that it was never only about warmth, never only about food. The hearth was also a stage, a place where life unfolded in patterns that were not just practical, but deeply human, deeply symbolic. When the day's labor was done, when the animals were fed and the tools set aside, people did not simply drift into silence. They gathered, and the hearth became the backdrop for stories, songs, and celebrations. The glow of flame gave rhythm to words, shadows on the walls became part of the tale, and the crackle of logs filled the pauses like a steady drum. Imagine a winter night in a small cottage. Snow lies thick outside, the world muffled and still. Inside, the fire glows steady. Children sit cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide, listening to an elder who speaks in a voice both calm and commanding. The tale may be of heroes, or spirits, or simply of the past season's hunt. But what matters most is not the tale itself. It is the ritual of telling, the act of weaving words in the glow of the hearth. Stories carried warmth just as much as the flames did. Songs, too, rose from the hearth. Simple chants at first, then melodies, then harmonies. Voices lifted together in the dark, carried by firelight into memory. The hearth was the first theater, the first concert hall, the first school. Children learned not only to speak, but to believe, to imagine, to belong. And then there were the festivals. In many cultures, the turning of the seasons was marked by fire. At midwinter, when nights were longest, hearths were fed with extra wood. The blaze made brighter, as if to remind people that even in deepest dark, light could endure. Families threw herbs or grains into the flames, offerings for luck in the year ahead. Some carried embers from the family hearth into the fields, blessing the soil, promising that crops would grow. The hearth was the altar of everyday life. Weddings were blessed by it, couples stepping over the threshold and sharing their first meal by its glow. Children were introduced to it, tiny hands held close to the warmth as a sign that they now belonged to the household. And in times of farewell, ashes sometimes carried into burials, as though even in death, the fire should remain near. Even holidays we know today carry echoes of these ancient rituals. Think of winter feasts, where families gather around tables heavy with food, candles flickering, fireplaces glowing. Think of the tradition of placing stockings by the chimney or leaving gifts near the fire. These are not inventions of the modern world. They are the long shadows of ancient practices carried forward because the hearth has always been the place where hope and memory meet. Close your eyes and imagine it. The fire burns low but steady. A circle of faces leans close. Someone hums a song, soft and slow. Someone else taps a rhythm on a piece of wood. Children giggle, then quiet as the story resumes. Outside, the night is vast, but inside, there is light, there is warmth, there is the rhythm of community. The hearth is not only a flame, it is a heartbeat. The longer we sit with the idea of the hearth, the clearer it becomes. It is not only stone and flame, but also word and story. Across centuries, across continents, the hearth slipped quietly into language, into songs, into the very way people thought about life itself. In many tongues, home and hearth were once the same word. To have a hearth was to have a place in the world. To lose a hearth was to lose belonging. That is why even today, we still speak of hearth and home as if the two could never be separated. The hearth was not only the physical center of a house, it was the symbol of everything that made life steady, warm, and safe. Think of the proverbs that survive. Don't let the fire go out on the hearth. It sounds simple, but it meant more than feeding the flames. It meant guarding family, guarding love, guarding the thread of life. Every man's hearth is his castle. A reminder that no matter how small or humble, the fire made a house sovereign, made it sacred. Cold hearth, cold heart, bright hearth, happy home. These words echo from a time when the glow of flame was a measure of joy itself. Fairy tales, too, place the hearth at their center. How many stories begin with a poor child sitting in the ashes, like Cinderella, overlooked by the world but warmed by the hearth's glow? How many heroes begin their journey by leaving the circle of firelight, stepping out into the night? And how often do those stories end with a return to the hearth, a return to safety, to family, to warmth? The fire became more than backdrop. It became symbol of the cycle of life itself: departure, trial, and homecoming. In some cultures, spirits were believed to live within the hearth, tiny guardians, unseen but ever present, watching the family, blessing the food, listening to the conversations. Offerings of grain or milk were sometimes poured into the fire, not wasted, but given to these quiet keepers of the home. The hearth was not only light in the darkness, it was a presence, a companion, a silent witness to every joy and sorrow. Even architecture carried this meaning. Houses were built around the hearth, not the other way around. In some ancient villages, the placement of every wall, every doorway, every beam was planned so that the fire would sit at the very heart, the immovable center. To step across the threshold was to step toward the flame. To sit near it was to be part of the family. And if we listen closely, we can still hear these echoes today. When people speak of gathering around the hearth, even if it is only a phrase, they mean more than sitting by a fire. They mean returning to something essential, to closeness, to connection, to the warmth that binds people together. When we light a candle for memory, when we speak of keeping the flame alive, we are using the same language that our ancestors once spoke, in whispers around ancient fires. So the hearth lives not only in history, not only in ruins of old stone fireplaces or blackened cave ceilings, but in our words, in the way we imagine safety and love. Every time we call a house a home, every time we call a family's bond a fire that never goes out, we are speaking in the language of the hearth.